Hello, I'm going to try again. I hope that I am getting through. I hope that this is posting online. You have a look at the time. It's 1:12. So if anyone can see me, let me know, please. I'm going to wait for a few more people. I see that there is Sibusiso is the only one online. I'm going to wait for a few more people to join us. Hope everyone's having a good Freedom Day. It's not what we're used to on a lockdown. Thanks, Sibusiso. I'm just going to wait for a few minutes, just for more people to join. It's a dull day in Pretoria. I'm coming to you from Pretoria. A year ago, a friend asked me what's FB, and I laughed at her because she didn't know what Facebook is. Less than a month ago, I had to ask her what's Zoom, and she, of course, returned the favor and had to laugh at me. It's the first time I'm doing a live on Facebook, so I'm just thinking of those I watched, hoping to get a few more people. South African Black Woman in Law is hosting us today. Very glad to be here. See, the numbers are increasing slowly. Okay, I've started getting a question or two. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Lenette Pillay. I'm an advocate. I practice in Pretoria. I was previously an attorney, about 7 years to 8 years. Been practicing now as an advocate for about 10 years. It's quite a journey. I completed my law degree in 1999. So when I was in standard 9, which should be your grade 11 now, we had our first democratic elections on the 27th of February. Hello, Aisha. Thank you. And thank you for inviting me to South African Black Women in Law. It's quite an impressive organization you have. And I think we need more people like you, your executive and your members in the country so that we can appreciate and bring awareness to the plight of the struggles that we have in law and highlight the freedoms and the gains we need to focus on that we received and notionally celebrate on 27 April of every year. So I say notionally because every day that we live is actually a day of freedom since then. 26 years. Think about the phrase born into freedom. and to only be 26 years if you've been born into freedom. Sorry, my laptop's making a sound. I'm just going to put it on silent. Mute it. So I want to start with a question that is everywhere today. What does Freedom Day mean to you? And thank you for the question. Freedom to me is celebrating the rights we get to exercise that we have in our Bill of Rights in our Constitution, or that comes from our Constitution. When we speak about our Constitution, it's really a piece of legislation that is one of the founding blocks of our freedom. And the Bill of Rights is just one chapter in an entire act and a piece of legislation, but it captures what our fundamental rights are. And people speak about freedom to do as you please. It's not freedom to do as you please. To me, it's a celebration of freedom within limitations where we respect others. So I don't have freedom to go and speak to someone in any manner that I please. I can't practice racism. I can't take freedom to the extent that it means infringing on someone else's rights in a manner that is just not within the limitations that we're provided with. Now, I've said I started my law degree 2 years into freedom. And when I started, it was a whole new world to me. You saw different races, you saw different cultures. I am not sure by 1996, when I started my degree, just how few white people I had seen before in my life. It was overwhelming. It's unbelievable, the exposure. I was exposed at that stage, for example, the LBQTI movement was not what it is today. Those days it was not open. And today when you go to university, it's probably a lot more open. But in 1996, what I did see was more people of color and more people being treated equally. And even back then, what you had was a separation amongst us that you could see if you looked properly and deeply, where you had the racial groups sitting separately. I think it's still a problem we have. I think it's still a huge problem. I think it was perhaps a year or two ago where there was a video of a school. And I don't want to talk about the merits, but I think it was preschool children where you saw separation. I think you still see it. I think you still see it in community in general. I'm hoping that we are seeing it less and less. The concept of being friends and having closeness with people of separate races be here any longer. I started off my degree a young democracy, and in my view, we are still a young democracy. I often hear people talking about 25 years after our elections, 25 years into democracy, quarter of a century if you put it in another way. But 25 years is not much. In 1652, you had the first colonizers come to our country, and this was just a stop on the way to India to get spices. That's all we were. But what did we become? We became the Cape Colony. And the reason I know this is not that I went and researched it to come speak to you today. It's because I had no choice. That was the history syllabus that I had to learn in primary school. My godson, I think, is now in grade 11. Sorry, Mohammed Ziad, if I've got that wrong. And a few years ago, I was helping him with his homework. It was the same thing there. And I remembered the dates. I remembered some of it, not great detail. But it surprised me that that is in our history books with less information about the changes in democracy. And I hope that it's changed now. I think it is changing. I think what we've come to know now is President Nelson Mandela. But there is more to it than that. There is so much more to the history of our country. If you look at it from 1652 to our first elections was 342 years. That's the history we have to wipe out. The history that we have to wipe out and has not happened in our 26 years. If you look at America, which everybody speaks about as the world power, 45th President Donald Trump is there today. 45 presidents. The 44th in around 2007 or 2009 was the first black president. The first. South Africa, we've done better. We've done much better. So if it takes 44 presidents before our people are able to vote in a black person, I think South Africa has not done badly. When we look at our democracy, I say it's a young democracy. And I don't doubt, and I think we all know, there's been a lot of corruption in our country. It's something that was perhaps hidden from us, or not accepted by us for a long time. I can tell you, I'm a person who for a long time was guilty of blinding myself to corruption, both in the private and the public sectors, by public officials, by ministers, deputy ministers, director generals, by CEOs in the private sector, because we've wanted to see the good. But as time has gone on, we've seen the difference. And one of the places that you see the difference is in the past, I would say 10 years in South Africa. We have a constitutional bench of 9, well 11, but 9 at any, normally in a sitting, 9 to 11. The first cases that appeared or that came to the Constitutional Court, in the first 10 to 15 years, there was not many of them that focused primarily on socio-economic rights. And the development of the law has changed. With this change in our jurisprudence, now you have challenges to the public protector. You have challenges to government where they have failed. In our provincial high courts, you have challenges to maladministration in municipalities. You have a court dealing with that. You have an oversight. We have our separation of powers. But at the same time, we presently have what I believe is a strong bench that is no longer afraid to challenge authority. Pre-1994, how many times, how many applications did you have of someone going to court and challenging the apartheid regime, a legalized system that celebrated not celebrating human dignity and freedom? How many times? If we listen to Nelson Mandela, President Mandela's speech when he was convicted, There were plans afoot to avoid it going to the media. And he chose to risk his life to publish this, to grow awareness. You find lots of South Africans today saying, I didn't know back then. It was hidden from some. Many chose not to see. Many chose not to see that the person that was their domestic worker was a human being. I remember following the first years, the end of apartheid, and there was an African lady who walked from house to house in the community in Chatsworth. And I'm from what was previously an Indian community. And she was selling clothing, and she came home and not exposed to people of color. There would be racist comments made when you spoke about African people. She was selling clothing, and when she came, my mother spoke to her. And when she spoke to her, the woman's son and husband had been killed in political violence. She became a very good friend of my mother's. Every time she came to Chatsworth, she visited. And that was shortly after apartheid. But what I do know is that even then, people looked at her strangely for having an African friend who came to visit, not who came to sell clothing, but a woman who ultimately came to visit a friend. Today, it's not unusual. And that to me is what democracy is about. And that to me is what freedom is about. Celebrating our rights to association within reasonable limits. Today, our right to freedom of movement is not what it was a month and a half ago. I don't know when it will go back to what it was. I really don't. If you look at the media reports, if you look at what's coming out from Professor Karim, from our minister, it's not likely to be before September. Months. The lockdown is being not quite lifted, but lightened to degrees. And when you look at media reports, you see much more legislation coming because of challenges to legislation. And as I said, pre-1994, how many people were able to approach a court without being victimized? How many people firstly thought to approach our courts? How many people had the strength to approach the court? Were able to take on the challenge and the fear that they would be killed, the fear that they would be victimized, the fear that you would fall off the 7th floor of John Foster Building in Johannesburg. And today I can say I believe the fear is not as great. I don't believe the fear is not there. But the development of the law in South Africa has changed drastically, so much so that I'm proud to say I'm a part of it. I'm embarrassed to say we're not where we should be. South African Black Women in Law, when I looked at the title, I assumed it was just about women. I was invited by one of the members of the executive who is male. And so that's not to say that I haven't been invited by the entire executive, but my contact person is a male in the executive of an organization that holds a title that fights for the rights of everyone and garners support. In fact, it doesn't garner support, it has natural support from our brothers. The system in South Africa is not as changed as much we would like. I'm an advocate at the Pretoria Bar. Sometime last year, perhaps earlier this year, I think it was, there was the NPA that appointed a team of senior counsels. That's some of the most senior members of our profession, of the legal community, to be involved in the prosecution arising from state capture. The team consists of 3 white males, 1 African male, in relation to senior counsels. Now, in relation to junior counsels, I understand that there, was a greater spread and divide. And we question, and we are able to question, why we are in a position where there wasn't consideration, or there was inadequate consideration. In my view, a lack of rationality by the powers that be, by people that lead major institutions, by an institution that's led by a female who seems to be doing a wonderful job, and a female who delegated some of her tasks to another female, or the task of appointing the team was delegated to another female, who again didn't think that, let me appoint females in the senior leaders. And the reasons provided to me are excuses. Let me give you one of them. One of them was that these seniors were appointed because they were working at reduced rates. Well, no one has told me which female senior has been approached that said, I'm not prepared to work at a reduced rate. Is it a lack of experience? No one has told me, and I've spoken to Lesego Monshe, one of our senior counsels in Pretoria, former prosecutor. No one approached her. We knew nothing of this before it was publicized in the media. Nothing. And then we have excuses like, you were not willing to reduce your rate. These people were in the matter before, so they have, I suppose, not institutional knowledge, but factual knowledge. Well, why were women senior counsels not given that factual exposure before? Why are you at a point where there is this lacking? Why is there only 1 African male in the team? Why is there a team of only 4? Why do attorneys not know that the state attorney briefs attorneys at times? Why do our SOEs, that's our state-owned enterprises and state-owned companies, why do we put out tenders and have panelists appointed, and then I hear, I'm on the panel. In the past 5 years, I've never received an instruction. In the past 5 years, I've received 2 or 3 instructions. While you have other people that are instructed regularly. It's not a situation where there is insufficient legal work in this country that all practitioners cannot survive. I understand in 1996, when I started my degree, we were told by our lecturers, it's, the market is becoming saturated. There's more and more attorneys or advocates or people with LLB degrees. To some degree, a discouragement to do the LLB degree. But the work is not as limited as it's suggested. in an office where an attorney is hamstrung by running 1,000 files for the state and doesn't discharge his or her duties the way he'd like to, not because he's not capable, but because he doesn't have the time. You cannot tell me that there is insufficient work for our practitioners. My friends should not have to say, I'm worried. I can't pay my child's school fees. Sorry. It touches me because it's my friend and children I know. And it's coming from someone who has spent years studying, educating herself, paying for her law degree herself. To be approaching 40 and to worry about your children. So to me, the legal fraternity has come a long way, because in 1995, I'm sure there are more people that said that. But in 2020, there shouldn't be people saying that as much as you see it now. I'm sorry. I really didn't plan for this. The friend I'm speaking about is an attorney. She's practiced for a number of years. She's in and out of my home. She's African female. Nobody looks at it as being odd or stares when she enters my home. It's better than 1994, but it's not better in all that we do. I want to give you some of the statistics that I picked up that we have spoken about in some of our groups. The appointment of senior counsels, 13th March this year, 24. 20 out of the 24 males. 4 out of the 24 female. 84% versus 16%. African females. So out of the 4, 1. 3 white females. So you then have, let's go to the males. 20 males appointed. Indian and colored, 0. African, 8. That's a third. African female, 4.17%. White male, 12 out of 24, 50%. Now, why do you have that? If you think about where we've come from a time where we had Bantu education, where we had schools to various races that were not equal. So if you in 1994 were 21 years old, you'd be 47 today. I hope I've got my math right. But if you had a poor education at the age of 21, if you were coming from where we were, sorry, my eyesight is not great, so I'm trying to read the comments as I go along. At 47, if you started off at 21 and you started off on the back foot, what could you have done? What could you have done for us to now say that you've had 25 years and you've had 26 years and everything in the country should have been fixed up? Things definitely should be better than it was, but it is definitely not what it should be. And we need to appreciate that we are a growing and a young democracy, and that we are getting there. Now, if you look at the numbers of attorneys, of the numbers of advocates, you will find jaded pictures. As we go along, we have a greater pool, because you didn't really have Black graduates pre-1994. If the first time a person of color was admitted, if the greater numbers increased after 1994, they would only received their degrees in 1998, 1999. You then do 2 years of articles, taking you to about 2020. Have children before the age of 20. So the people who received their degrees coming out of the democracy are only now reaching the age where you would ordinarily, start having your children, where you'd use the degree and the legal education you've received over the past 20 years to pay for your children to get that education. If you look at the numbers in schools, you have our private schools and your public schools. Who's in our public schools? And who's in our private schools? And it's not the fault of the white student in the school, but it's the fault of apartheid. It's the fault of a system, that legal system, that is different from today. And that is the change for me in the legal profession. It starts off with changing the legislation, and as you go, there is more and more legislation that is challenged. At one stage, you had to seek a special prayer as a person of color to be admitted as an attorney or an advocate. You actually had to put in a court order. That's what I want. I want to, despite being a person of color, despite it being in breach of legislation, I want to be admitted, or being contrary to legislation. I'm not quite sure whether it was the Immorality Act. I can't quite remember. Now look at South Africa. I drew a parallel earlier to America, and the reason I do that is because they were the first, I've just got this down, George Washington, the first US president, 1789. Remember, we were colonized from 1652. And I want to speak about women and whether women in South Africa have made a difference and have been part of this movement. I'm not sure if anyone watched the movie Kratoa. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. First time I heard of this amazing woman was in a movie. Not something, and I doubt something children are actively educated on. So we all learn about President Nelson Mandela. But how many people know of Kratoa? Let me tell you about her. She was a Khoi woman. She was taken by Jan van Riebeeck when she came in, well, when he arrived in 1652, not sure precisely which year she was taken. She was 11 or 12 years old. She was taken as a slave. 11 or 12 years old. She learned the language of the Dutch. Now, she knew the language vernacular of the Khoi. She then became, as she grew older, a means of communication. The first war between the Dutch and the Khoi, she's the one that resolved it. How many lives did she save by stopping a war? And we don't celebrate her. But today we can. Today we must educate each other. Language. just by learning language. But you know, I am tired of people in relation to language seeing or taking language to be a measure of intelligence. It is not. She may not have spoken the best English. Many people today don't speak the best English. But a person who speaks 5 languages, I think that's something to be celebrated. A person who speaks 3 or 4 languages is to be celebrated. And going back to Krotoa, she was actually also the first woman who entered into a marriage with what was then called a settler. She was sent to Robben Island as a prisoner after the death of her husband. She'd gotten involved in liquor, in prostitution, in a society she didn't fit in to. She was rejected because she was forced out of her own family. And she became, what would be the phrase we use? She was ostracized for being coy in one culture, and in another she was ostracized for not fitting in because she was living with the Dutch. And the point of all of this is we're not there any longer. We are not, you're not ostracized any longer for having cross-cultural relationships. But I must say, people still do sometimes stare, quite often, but not like before. But let's go to her being banished to Robben Island. She was banished to Robben Island when she died in 1674. So it was sometime in the 50s or 60s. And Nelson Mandela, President Mandela, our ministers, our former presidents, were sent to the same place 3 centuries later. For that to exist 3 centuries later. And for now, for us to say, this must be a remembrance. I've been to Robben Island only once. And the feeling you get when you're there, it's just a reminder. It's a reminder of how much we've changed. You think about this long trip where I get motion sickness and I go up on the top of the boat. Everyone in those days was pushed in the bottom. He didn't get to have his Valoid. But you were forced. Sorry, let me come back to the parallel I've drawn with America. And one of the reasons I've done it, other than the lateness of their first Black president, is also for us to look at Michelle Obama, the First Lady, or the former First Lady. She's a Princeton graduate. She's a Harvard graduate. She graduated from what I would think was their school in 1981. She started at Princeton in, I think, would be 1982. And this is what she said. She said her teachers dissuaded her from studying. They warned her that she was setting her sights too high. And one of the things she spoke about was how she would not be asked for her opinion, but she would be asked what her brother's opinion was. When she went to Harvard, there was a roommate of hers who asked to be moved to another room. It was refused, but that was the request made in 1988. Just 4 years before our first elections. And what she says is, and this is a quotation from her, education gave her opportunities beyond what she imagined. And one of the things she speaks about, and in fact it was a friend that told me this, is imposter syndrome, where you join a society and you think, I feel like an imposter. I have my LLB degree, but I feel like I don't fit in. And I feel like this is not home. We're coming to a stage in the legal community. And thank you, Rihanna, for teaching us it's not fraternity. We've come to a stage where in the legal community, it's becoming more comfortable. You don't have imposter syndrome, or well, you don't have it as much as you used to before. I felt like an imposter. There's still times now when I feel like an imposter, and not just in the legal field, but in general conversations that I have where I see the distinct difference in my education. And I can see it's because I've come from what's a former House of Delegates school. I was told, I just want to go back to Michelle Obama. This is a woman with a doctorate in law who says she suffered with imposter syndrome. If you are a person who's not had the opportunity to educate yourself because of a lack of funds, how are you going to be feeling? As a person with a Bachelor of Law degree, I struggle. I tell you, I finished my Bachelor of Law degree in 1999. In the year 2000, I could not find articles. I did law school. I started my master's, never finished it. But I started it because I was lucky. I got a scholarship, well, to some degree, a percentage scholarship. And I lectured for a bit. And the following year, I got articles because I took the horters, I sat in front of the computer, and I went one by one through every law firm that I could find, and I emailed them. And I really think I was lucky to get it, because in 2020, you see LinkedIn profiles and you see, people on LinkedIn saying, I can't find articles. I've been without articles for a year, for 2 years, for 3 years. I've got my degree. What's the purpose? One of the reasons they can't find articles is because legal firms don't get enough work to hire candidate attorneys. Some people have come to the bar because they couldn't get articles. There's nothing wrong with coming to the bar for that, for any reason. But where your options are limited because of financial constraints and societal constraints, I say we have to go a lot further. But like I've said, we've come quite far. I'm sorry I'm not responding to your comments. My eyesight is not what it should be, and I've got to sort of lean into to read. I received some questions from members of this Facebook group, and I want to just go through them. First is, how equal is South Africa? It's not equal at all. If someone with a 4-year degree can struggle, it's not equal. My friend is voicing her opinion here. She says it's as equal as it is unequal. To me, it's not equal. It is better than the equality we had in 1994, but it's not the equality I want to see in 5 years' time, when the next group of people who started their LLB degrees or their Bachelor of Law, their BA or BCom degrees moving towards law. I want to find in 5 years' time that someone can apply for articles, and there will be firms who have money to appoint them. There will be firms that will not say it is necessary for you to have a car for you to get articles here, which excludes to me a large percentage of law graduates. And people are different. I did my articles in what was then known as a white firm. My principal hired me after receiving the email, and I think I was fortunate that it was at a time where he required a candidate attorney. He asked me if I had a driver's license. I did not. I couldn't afford to get one. You can't afford the lessons. So he told me, I'll pay for your lessons. So I'm not one who says and goes after white people in our country as being unfair. Everyone is progressive. I believe my principal was progressive to pay for my driving lessons, to pay for my driving test, to allow me to go for it more than once when I failed, to allow me to drive his Audi when I, as a child, had as a major goal in my life that I thought would be difficult to achieve, that I would one day be able to get my license and one day be able to own a car. And there's lots of things that I'm thankful for. One of the things my principal said to me is, every day you will sit with me and you will tell me what your lesson for the day is. And of course, with practice, we all know that doesn't happen. But he taught me that you must educate yourself and you must look for lessons that you learn from life. So my principal's name was Vernon O'Connell. I think someone asked that, or that might have come up as a WhatsApp message to me. Have we corrected the wrongs of the past? Some of it, yes. Some of it, no. A long way to go. What are your memories of 1994? My memory of the 27 April 1994 was, prior to this, my mother engaging in long discussions with the neighbor about what time they were going to vote, whether they had their identity books, how long they were going to stand in the queues. And my memory is of her leaving. At the time, I could not vote. So she went on her home. The school we voted in, or she voted in, was 2 doors away. Excuse me. And she went with the name, and she came back after such a long time. And when you're younger, a long time is a lot longer than it is to an adult. But that's my memory of 27 April 1994. I also remember watching the news and seeing Nelson Mandela, President Mandela, cast his vote, seeing other people cast their votes. I also remember a huge debate, and I'm not sure if my siblings remember this. One of my brothers, Stephen, he turned 18, I think it was in July of 1994. The big debate was whether he could vote. And there was this desire to have as many people vote as was possible. And one of the things I remember after is that every elections, my mother wanted to vote, because unlike me, she truly experienced apartheid. And I'm not saying she experienced it more than others, but she experienced it in a way that I could never understand. Given the opportunity to change anything in the Constitution, what would it be? You know, there's this debate about whether the right to land in the Constitution should be changed, whether there's room to argue in the present Constitution that you can have land distribution that's more fair. Just in our country, I think it's more than 70%, 72% of the land is owned by whites. It's an unfair distribution. That I absolutely agree with. The history of South Africa is that people of color, you had the central cities and the main points where white people lived, and on the outskirts you'd have people of color, the domestic workers who would come in. They'd have to travel a distance, they'd have to pay taxi fare, use up most of the money they earned in just getting to work. Still the position today. If you look at Pretoria, how many people come from areas that are further out to work, take the bus at 5 a.m. to get to work at 7:30, at 8. I don't, and for that reason, I would say that to make redistribution of land easier, I would change the clause that relates to land. What are your hopes for the country? I think I've expressed that. My hopes are to be where we should be, to not have any person face imposter syndrome, to have every person be able to pay their child's school fees, get the best education, without being worried that my child's going to be expelled, that I can't afford to pay the school fees this month. You know what's my greatest hope for the country? Sorry, it's not just, this is just one of the basics. That we come to a time where there isn't a single pit toilet in this country. That we come to a time where no one dies because they fall into a toilet. My regrets and the things not done in our country. I think my regret is that I didn't have political awareness when I was younger. I really didn't. What I do remember is that my eldest brother's name is Nelson. And I do remember that someone once, probably pre-1989 or 1988, called him Nelson Mandela. And there was this thing of don't use that name, because of the fear of simply using the name Nelson Mandela. And I don't think the person meant it in any bad way. I think it's like you say Leonardo and you go Leonardo da Vinci, Leonardo DiCaprio. So, and having heard that, I still didn't have political awareness. And it came. And when I went to university and I saw these differences, and I had never seen as many white people in one place. I had never seen as many African people in one place. I often say the only white people I knew before I reached university was the nurses that came to school to give us those injections. Really, that was my exposure to white people. And my mum, who was a machinist, there's a picture at home where she was with her white employer. But I didn't know them. So my regrets are that there are people like me that are there, and that there are still people who are not aware. It's in relation to the rhetoric we have in our country, where Black people, there's just a distinction in how we speak, where what many of you and many of us call disabled people, and my friend Etienne says to me, he's not disabled, he's differently abled. But that's the rhetoric we have, where a word devalues a person just because of something that's a part of them. And sorry, regrets, things. How has the transition from pre-94 to post-94 affected the legal practitioner with regard to the freedom of practice as a legal practitioner for Africans, Indians, and Coloureds? I think it's improved greatly. Nelson Mandela started the first black law firm in the country. They then went on to join Oliver Tambo as a partner. But I would say even in 1994, the number of law firms of color was much less than it is today. And the number of law firms where people of color were single practitioners because they just wouldn't get into the big firms was a lot lower. And the number of people of color in what was formerly our, and perhaps to some degree, some firms that are still largely white. I think that's been a huge difference. The fact that you can go to court. In the Western Cape, I'm not sure Many of you know this. You'll find in the Western Cape, unlike here in Gauteng, that they robe in their chambers, the advocates, and they walk to court. And the history of that is that there was an advocate of color who was not permitted to robe in the High Court because it was only for white people. It's now become the tradition in Cape Town. And I think in Cape Town today, you'd have the option of going to court. I've appeared in that court and I've robed in court. To me, it was just strange. Sorry, it's called robing rooms. These days, we don't have much robing rooms in our court. I think the labor court may be the only court we have seen one, in the labor court in Gauteng and I think in Durban. But the point I'm making is that we now have freedom to robe in court as a person of color. It's a simple game, but its value is amazing. Do you think that there's been transformation in terms of accommodating female legal practitioners? This is unconscious bias. And so this question, I thought, what a well-intentioned question. But the question uses the word transformation and accommodating female legal practitioners. Sorry, I don't mean to be offensive to the person who gave me that question. But the point is that women are not accommodated. Black people are not accommodated. We are competent and we deserve our place where we are. And we deserve where we are not where we should be. We deserve to improve and to come to a place that is deserved. So if a question is whether I think there is transformation in relation to female legal practitioners, yes, I think there is, but not what it should be, in the same way as it's not what it should be for Black people in general. You see lots of gains in relation to Black males, not as much in relation to female practitioners. And even there, you know, go back to the figures I mentioned earlier. 24 males, sorry, 20 out of 24 people appointed as senior counsel on 13th March this year. 20 of them. 84% were male. It goes back to our history. It's not simply that they are not competent women. It's that they may be inexperienced women. It is that women are given divorce work. It's that women are not given corporate work. I started practice and my principal was a law firm that did in corporate law and employment law, and he granted me exposure to both. And I was fortunate in that way. But as I went along, I fell into employment law. Now, I've been at the bar for 10 years, and it's not very long ago, perhaps 5 years into practice, that I got my first corporate matter, first insolvency matter, 5 years in. And remember that I did my articles in 2000 and I did insolvency law. For 15 years, I didn't get a matter in insolvency law. I don't consider myself to be a senior practitioner, but I'm also not a very junior practitioner. And if I'm in this mid-level, I can tell you it's not that I'm not competent, it's that I'm inexperienced. And if you give me more time and if you give me more exposure and experience, then I will improve. And I'm not now what I was 5 years ago in my knowledge and the practice of commercial law. So yes, there's been transformation in relation to females. Hopefully, well, not hopefully. Let us, South African Black women in law, I see is a lot of youngsters, LLB students. I challenge you to change that. You must be the person that gets an insolvency matter and works on it, does not turn it away because you don't have the experience. You go and you ask a colleague. Don't just ask female colleagues, because there's this perception that males sometimes don't want to help us. That's not true. Males are our brothers. They are not foreigners to us. They have the experience, and you draw on their knowledge and their experience. You draw on the knowledge of everyone. I think I might be out of time, but let me just round up by saying I give a general challenge to all of you to change and improve our country, because we were not where we were, but we are not where we want to be. This nation of non-compliance, this rhetoric of non-compliance, please change it. This rhetoric of not being aware, not educating yourselves, and not educating others. If I see a grammar error from a friend in a document, I wouldn't point it out to her in a group, but I tell her, I'm not being offensive, but this is where this is not the British English we use in South Africa. You don't laugh at a person whose English is not equal to your English, or whose English is not the British English we're supposed to practice. These memes and these videos where you mock people who, not by error, look, we'll make fun of people who make errors in their speech. That's people of all colors that do that. But where you mock a person because their English is not the best English, that's actually, to me, racism. Don't mock, educate. So sorry, I've gone on a bit. My challenge is to educate each other and to bring us to where we need to be. Thank you so much to South African Black women in law, and to my brothers and sisters for inviting me and for hosting. I hope I've given a perspective, or a different perspective to view. It might be a jaded perspective, but it's jaded because it's what I see, it's what I experience, and it's what I've lived. It's what I hope to be a part of changing, and you can only learn from experience. So just like I started off being unable to drive before a white man got me to where I need to be, before he educated me. So I've lost my train of thought. Educate each other, no matter who you are. I hope you have enjoyed it.